For 11 seasons, Cheers made America believe that somewhere in Boston there really was a bar where everybody knew your name. Behind the bar stools and the punchlines was a company of actors, some famous, some quietly beloved, who built an illusion episode after episode for over a decade. In the years since the finale aired in 1993, the show has lost 13 of the people who helped make it magic, from its most celebrated stars to the background regulars who never said more than a line or two, but who fans still recognize instantly. This is their story, told as honestly and accurately as the record allows. Nicholas Colasanto was the first face of Cheers to leave the world, and his loss is still remembered as one of the show's quiet heartbreaks. Born in Providence, Rhode Island, Colasanto served in the Navy during the Second World War before turning to acting later in life. Long before Cheers, he had already built a substantial career behind the camera, directing episodes of Bonanza, Starsky and Hutch, and Hawaii Five-0, and appearing on screen in films like Raging Bull and Family Plot. When Cheers cast him as Ernie Coach Pantusso, the forgetful, warm-hearted bartender who mentored Sam Malone, Colasanto was already in his late 50s, an unusual age for a performer to become a breakout star, but audiences fell for him instantly. Off-camera, his health had been declining for some time, and cast members later recalled that he pushed through filming even as his strength faltered. He died of a heart attack on February 12, 1985, at the age of 61, just weeks after stepping away from the show. His death shocked the cast and crew, who had grown to love him as much as viewers had, and Cheers never recast the role. Instead, the writers folded his absence gently into the story, having his character retire to Florida, a tribute to a man they could not bring themselves to write out any other way. Kirstie Alley became the face that replaced Coach's warmth with something sharper and funnier, stepping into Cheers in 1987 as Rebecca Howe, the frazzled, ambitious bar manager who never quite got the upper hand on her own life. Born in Wichita, Kansas, Alley had already built a name for herself before Cheers, but the role made her one of the biggest sitcom stars in the country, earning her both an Emmy and a Golden Globe. She stayed with the show until its final season in 1993 and went on to a long career that included Look Who's Talking in Years as a recognizable presence on reality television, from Dancing with the Stars to The Masked Singer. Alley kept much of her personal health struggles private, and in 2022, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. She fought it out of the public eye, continuing to work and post cheerfully online even as her condition worsened. She died on December 5, 2022, at the age of 71, a loss that stunned fans who had no idea she was ill. Her Cheers castmates, including Ted Danson and Kelsey Grammer, publicly mourned her as one of the sharpest comedic talents the show ever had. Jay Thomas brought a very different kind of energy to the Cheers bar as Eddie LeBeck, Carla's on-again, off-again husband, and a professional hockey goalie turned ice show performer. Thomas, born in Kermit, Texas, played the role from 1987 to 1989, and his exit from the show became one of its stranger footnotes. According to accounts from the writer's room, Thomas made an offhand joke on his radio show about having to kiss his co-star Rhea Perlman, and the comment did not sit well with the people running the series. Not long after, his character was written out in dramatic and comic fashion, killed by a Zamboni during an ice show, with the show later revealing at his funeral that Eddie had secretly been a polygamist. Thomas took the professional setback in stride and kept working steadily for decades afterward, becoming a familiar guest star across American television and a longtime radio host. In his later years, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, which he managed privately while continuing his broadcasting career. He died on August 24, 2017, at the age of 69, remembered by colleagues as one of the most naturally funny men to ever sit behind a microphone. Harry Anderson never joined the main cast of Cheers, but the show's fans remember him fondly as Harry, the Hadjeet, a slick, lovable con artist who kept turning up at the bar to hustle Sam, Norm, and Cliff out of their money with a magician's flair. Anderson, born in New England, had an unusual path into show business, having spent his early years performing street magic and sleight of hand across the country before landing steady television work. His run of guest appearances on Cheers began in its first season and continued on and off for years, even as he became a star in his own right playing Judge Harry Stone on Night Court, a role that brought him 3 consecutive Emmy nominations. He later starred in Dave's World and continued performing magic throughout his career, eventually settling into a quieter life in Asheville, North Carolina. In early 2018, Anderson suffered a stroke, and he died on April 16th of that year at the age of 65. Fans of both Cheers and Night Court remembered him as a performer whose warmth and wit felt completely unforced, whether he was working a card trick or delivering a punchline. Frances Sternhagen brought a formidable presence to Cheers as Esther Clavin, the sharp-tongued, no-nonsense mother of the show's resident know-it-all mailman Cliff. Sternhagen was already a celebrated stage actress by the time she joined the cast in the mid-1980s, and her performance earned her 2 Emmy nominations for a role that only required a handful of appearances each season. Long before television, she had built one of the most respected careers in American theater, appearing on Broadway across 5 decades and earning 2 Tony Awards along the way, one for The Good Doctor and one for The Heiress. Her personal life included a long marriage to fellow actor Thomas Carlin, who died in 1991, after which she continued acting well into her 90s, appearing in films, television, and stage productions almost until the end of her life. Sternhagen died on November 27, 2023, at the age of 93, closing out one of the longest and most respected careers of anyone ever associated with the show. Keene Curtis joined Cheers later in his career as John Allen Hill, the owner of the upscale restaurant above the bar, bringing a commanding voice and a dry, aristocratic wit to every scene he appeared in. Curtis was already 67 years old when he took the role, but like Colasanto before him, he proved that Cheers had a gift for finding late-career performers who instantly felt indispensable. Before television, Curtis had built an extraordinary stage career, winning a Tony Award for his work in The Rothschilds and appearing steadily on Broadway and in film and television for decades. In his final years, Curtis was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a condition that slowly took from him the very things that had defined his career: his memory, his voice, and his sense of the roles that had made him famous. He lived his last years in a care facility in Utah, and he died on October 13, 2002, at the age of 79. Colleagues remembered him as a performer whose control of language and timing made even small roles feel essential. Roger Rees arrived on Cheers in its later seasons as Robin Calcord, a suave and morally slippery English businessman who became one of Rebecca Howe's most memorable romantic entanglements. Rees, born in Aberystwyth, Wales, had come to acting almost by accident, filling in for a role while working as a scenic painter, and went on to become one of the most respected classical stage actors of his generation, winning a Tony Award for originating the title role in the life and adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. His Cheers role ran from 1989 to 1993 and showcased the same sly charm that had made him a stage legend. In late 2014, Rees was diagnosed with brain cancer just as he was preparing to open in the Broadway musical The Visit. Rather than step away, he continued performing through surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, only stopping when the illness took his ability to speak in the spring of 2015. He and his longtime partner, writer and producer Rick Ellis, had married in 2011 after more than 3 decades together. Roger Rees died on July 10, 2015, at his home in New York at the age of 71, and Broadway theaters dimmed their marquee lights in his honor. Kevin Conroy's connection to Cheers was brief, a single guest appearance in 1989 as Daryl Mead, but his career afterward made him one of the most beloved voices in American pop culture as the definitive voice of Batman across 3 decades of animation, film, and video games. Conroy's early life was marked by real hardship. He grew up in a difficult household and spent time away from his family to finish school. As a gay actor working in an industry that was often unwelcoming toward openly gay performers, he spent years keeping that part of his life private before eventually coming out publicly. He later wrote about that experience in an autobiographical comic story, Finding Batman, which won the Eisner Award, one of comics' highest honors. He continued voicing Batman and attending fan conventions even as his health declined from what was later revealed to be colorectal cancer. Kevin Conroy died on November 10, 2022, just weeks before what would have been his 67th birthday. mourned by generations of fans who had grown up with his voice as the sound of Gotham's protector. Markie Post appeared on Cheers in 1983 as Heather Landon, a charming friend of Diane Chambers, in a role that helped launch her into a decade of television stardom on shows like Night Court and The Fall Guy. Post, born in Palo Alto, California, built a reputation as one of the most reliably charismatic performers of the era, moving comfortably between comedy and drama. Her personal life was relatively private and stable. She married writer and producer Michael A. Ross, and the two raised two daughters together away from the spotlight. In her final years, Post was diagnosed with cancer, but she continued acting, doing voice work, and appearing at fan conventions, rarely letting on how much she was struggling. She died on August 7, 2021, at her home in Los Angeles, at the age of 70, remembered by former co-stars as someone who brought warmth to every set she worked on. George Wendt is the most recent Cheers cast member to pass, and for many longtime fans his loss felt like losing an old friend, not just a favorite character. Wendt played Norm Peterson, the barfly whose entrance line became one of the most famous running gags in television history, and he earned 6 consecutive Emmy nominations for the role. His path to Cheers began humbly at Chicago's famed Second City Improv Theater, where he started out sweeping the stage before working his way into performing, and where he met his future wife, Bernadette Burkett, who voiced Norm's never-seen wife, Vera, on the show. After Cheers ended in 1993, Wendt kept working steadily in television and film for decades, including a memorable turn on Saturday Night Live's recurring bear sketches and later guest spots on shows like The Goldbergs. He continued making public appearances up until shortly before his death, including a spot on The Masked Singer in 2023. George Wendt died in his sleep at his Los Angeles home on May 20, 2025, at the age of 76, with his family requesting privacy and describing him as a devoted family man and a loyal friend to everyone who knew him. Al Rosen never had a credited character name beyond Al, but for 8 seasons and more than 100 episodes, he was a fixture of the Cheers bar, a background regular whose occasional one-liners, most famously a single shout at Sinatra, became a running joke among longtime fans. Rosen came to the role late in an already long career. Born in Baltimore in 1910, he had worked in entertainment since the 1940s, first as a bit player, later as a production supervisor on shows like What's My Line, and even, according to his own account, as a stuntman for the Three Stooges. He was already in his 70s when Cheers cast him, making him one of the oldest members of the show's extended company. Rosen's appearances stopped after the 8th season because he was undergoing treatment for cancer, and he died on August 2, 1990, at the age of 80. The following season, the episode Norm and Cliff's Excellent Adventure was dedicated in his memory, a quiet tribute to a performer most viewers never knew by name but instantly recognized by face. Phil Pearlman holds a small but touching place in Cheers history as one of the bar's recurring regulars, appearing in more than 100 episodes as Phil alongside